Greetings and welcome to In-Depth. I'm Dike Rostant. Very happy to have part two of a conversation with Professor Corin Bailey looking at restorative justice. In terms of the last point that we would have left off on in our first conversation, you were talking about the fact that it is voluntary. And even before we get back to that, looking at the fact that a lot of the traditional system is coercive punishment, and you would have spoken about some parallels to existing educational systems. I want us to pick up from there, thank you. What are some of those parallels that you see?
Right. So many of the systems, structural systems within the region have been borrowed, or I should say handed down to us in the period, in the post-emancipation period, that period immediately following emancipation. We borrowed our system of education was handed down to us by our colonial masters, our system, and it's the same with our systems of punishment. What that means is that, as you can imagine, at the time, these systems were not designed for everyone. You know, the nature of colonialism was it's the ultimate form of capitalism, which is, it is meant to benefit those at the top. So in the same way that our education systems, the majority of them within the region, by their very design, exacerbate inequalities, our system of punishment similarly exacerbates inequalities. It does not help for the vulnerable to get over them. It actually makes it worse, and that is exactly what the system of our system of punishment does. It does not help. It does not work. So we have to do something different.
And you say that, and I think of Angela Davis and her treatise on it, but it also makes me think, looking at it and under that description, the ultimate form of capitalism, looking at it as well as in spaces that are of a larger scale that would utilize their prison population or incarcerated persons differently to get labor from them that would go into the system. Like you said, ultimate form of capitalism. Why is it, do you think, that we haven't disrupted that traditional system? Why do you think, what are some of those reasons that it still exists the way that it does?
Within the region, because
yes,
we think we believe that that is how it has to be. That it is very difficult to change hearts and minds. It is very difficult for us to release ourselves from beliefs and systems that have always been there. We believe that that is how it has to be. And I mean, I could go further, and I could say that one of the legacies, another of the legacies of colonialism is how it is that we, the powerful treat the weak. We have been taught that the powerful are to dominate the weak, and you see that through interactions between man to woman, parent to child, teacher to student, police to citizen, state to citizen, and the poor are the vulnerable. These are the ones that are wrapped up in this vicious cycle of poverty to prison. And so there is not this urgency to disrupt that system because it does not affect those within society generally for whom there would be a clamoring to change the system for. Am I making sense?
Yes, so far, but I also want you to answer the person who says with data, because I think you would have spoken to factors or risks helping someone reach to prison. Answer the person who said there's so many people who are poor, but they don't break the law, they don't go to prison. So, and talk to that person, thank you.
One of the most common responses that you get from people when you make to me is an obvious point that these structural inequalities and these hardships lead to criminality. People say, but if that's the case, everybody would commit crimes, but that is not true. So think of it's all about and we're talking about data-driven, it's all about identifying risk, right? So if you think about risk if you think of everybody being born with an empty basket in their hand, and as time passes, you keep throwing things in the basket. So you might throw exposure to community violence. They see violence every day. Throw that in. Throw corporal punishment, at home and at school. You throw that in. Throw poverty in. Throw stigma as a result of where it is you live. You throw all of these things into the basket. Eventually, it becomes too heavy, right? For some people, they may not have everything in that basket. Others may, or others do, right? So as that basket becomes too heavy, you may succumb to its weight. For others, they may have something buffering that, right? So there is something to rest that basket on. So the important thing is that there are conditions, that basket, that cultivates conditions for criminality. Just as how you may throw seeds into a field and not everyone will germinate, so it is with risk. It is not about whether or not everyone who is exposed to those factors turns to criminality, but it is about cultivating the conditions in which criminality will emerge.
And is it a matter of disrupting the system that we have totally, or overlaying systems on top of that? Does it even allow for that, to be able to have more of a drive towards restorative justice?
No, I think it is. I think it is. It is disrupting the system, because I think you have to, as I said, it requires a redefining of what crime is, but it requires a rethinking of from our regional governments in terms of how it is that we see punishment. And I think Jamaica is doing a good job at leading the way where that is concerned. It doesn't mean you have to pull it all down and build from the bottom. But what it is that we want, as I said, is a change in how it is we see punishment. That if it is governments are accepting of the concept of restorative justice, then it means working towards diversion of cases away from the traditional justice system. Doesn't mean all cases. A state has the right to decide which cases they want to keep running through the traditional system. They may decide that those crimes that are particularly heinous will remain so. But the ultimate aim is to divert cases from the traditional justice system, and that just means setting up a system alongside it, so that for some crimes, and again I use an example of theft, so that for some crimes for which we accept that maybe sending them to prison actually may make things worse, make them emerge more hardened versions of themselves to commit more heinous crimes. Instead, we take them and we divert them through the restorative justice process. And so, in doing so, give them a better opportunity to reassimilate into society once it is that they have taken part in restitution.
And I want to talk about that when we return from this break. We're speaking with Professor Corin Bailey. We're looking at restorative justice. Stay with us. We'll return with more. Welcome back. We are speaking with Professor Corin Bailey. We're looking at restorative justice. And I like the fact, I don't know if it checks boxes or it's a little neater certain ways, but looking at theft as one of those possibilities to divert from the traditional justice system, Professor. Take me through some of the incremental possibilities of this person has stolen X amount. Normally, by these statutes, they would spend this amount of time losing liberty. How do you transpose that into some of these things that you're espousing in the restorative justice system?
Right. It's very hard for me to speak to term limits because they differ throughout the region. But generally, someone comes into contact with the justice system. They're apprehended by the police. They go into remand. They await, which could be a number of years. They await trial, and then they are sentenced. after sentencing. It's said there's an attempt to rehabilitate. After sentencing, they are released back into society. Within restorative justice, what you would be apprehended, then you would be, if it is that it is determined that that is a crime for which the state believes one could avoid prison. Instead, you are diverted to whatever kind of restorative justice center that the state has set up. That process begins through mediation, through counseling, through that meeting with the affected parties, victim offender, and representatives from the community. And path to restitution is decided upon. As I said, it does not mean that it is going easy. It does not mean that once you go through that process, that secure confinement is off the table. But what it means is that all parties involved would determine the path to restitution that is agreed upon, and then that occurs. It may be that, as I said, it may be that the stolen item is returned, and then there will always be a second part to that, but that is agreed upon by all parties, and then that occurs, and prison is avoided. So as a result, that individual has a better chance of finding a different path, because believe me when I say, you send somebody to prison and their chances of finding a different path reduced to almost zero.
And I'm even looking at the fact that that time spent, if there isn't something being learned, if there's something going towards rehabilitation, that person comes out better at what they may have. It's very possible that that person comes out better at what they may have done wrong in the first place. But you also literally lose person hours. So if that person is not incarcerated and can be working towards something, one, you save money by not having to clothe, house, feed that person. You also have that person contributing, hopefully, to the system from the outside. But that also begs the question, though, what are some of those things? Because I don't necessarily see persons flocking towards making groups, support groups, restorative justice groups for persons who have committed crimes, who have harmed, versus persons who have been victims, persons who have been harmed. Is that something that you see scope for, can happen, can be set up? What would some of those parameters be?
As in, what are some of the forms of restitution?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it may be some kind of, as I said, if it's theft, the first thing it is that you need to give back what it is that you have stolen. It may be some kind of state community service. It may be some type of literal community service. You have to remember that a lot of, for the majority of crimes within our region, violent crimes, if we're talking about assault, obviously murder, a victim cannot take part in that process. But for most violent offenses, these are people that are known to each other. They know each other. These are conflicts within communities, between individuals. Often you find that if it is that you bring those two together, some kind of, and there is the threat of going to prison behind them. There is an impetus from within to resolve, so as not to go to prison. And it may be, so there are some very interesting programs where it is that an offender from a particular gang, for example, gets arrested for assault, and as part of that process, they now must take part in what we call violence interrupting, for example, engaging with their side in order to end a history of conflict. As you can imagine, that is much more valuable than just locking somebody away. It does a lot more good to engage them in that way than to simply incapacitate them and then release them at some point for them to continue what it is that they were doing, a more hardened version of themselves.
And we have 1.5 minutes more, and I give you that for closing statements. I also want to ask about groupings. So, in terms of support systems for persons who have committed harm, who have done harm to people, are there places, to your experience, what does the data say that people can check in, hold each other accountable? So I'm not doing these things. These are some of the triggers that have worked. And recognizing them, I'm able to deal with them a little differently. We have a minute. It's yours.
Right. So good question as well. But the short answer to that is that we don't have many. And what you have to do is you have to remember that this is not something, restorative justice is not something that the vast majority of our regional governments have signed on to. So as a result, there are not those systems in place. But the reason I say this is a good question because many of those things are what it is that we need. A system of restorative justice honestly cannot operate well without that. And so you need these organizations and these systems that refer people who are at risk or people who have committed harm to institutions or groups or organizations that can assist them. But we don't have many of those in the region. No, we don't have enough. We do have some, but we don't have enough.
And with that, we want to say thank you so much, Professor Corin Bailey, talking about restorative justice, looking at it from the aspect of a criminologist, as well as Professor of Sociology, Crime and Social Inequality at the Cave Hill campus, as well as editor of the Caribbean Journal of Criminology. On behalf of the entire TTT News team, I'm Dike Rostant. This has been In Depth with me. Thank you so much for joining us.